Hello, Professor Gruhn here, and welcome back. We're continuing our journey with Murach jQuery, second edition. Oh, but first, let me get my book. Good, here it is. We're doing pretty good. We're on chapter 8. We're on page 248 out of, 570 pages. So we're about halfway done, and we're about halfway through the semester as we're rattling off there. So I think we're in pretty good shape. Control Shift. So chapter 8, we're working through forms and data validation. Now, quite honestly, you've already been doing a lot of this with a lot of the assignments that we've done thus far. Now it's going to probably just explain some of the details behind it. I am reading the chapter with you for the first time, so if I stumble over a couple of things, please, I apologize. And again, my goal is to kind of give a high-level overview on the points that I think are kind of important as we go through it. I'm not going to show you absolutely everything. You're definitely expected to read the chapter and go along. Objectives: use of jQuery selectors, methods, and events for working with a form jQuery application. Use the validation plugin to validate the data in a form. Knowledge: general use of HTML5 controls, attributes working with forms. In general terms, describe the use of HTML attributes, CSS pseudo-classes for data validation. Describe the use of jQuery for working with forms and controls, and describe the use of validation plugins. So on page 250 and 251, there's a little example of a simple web form, and you've already done some of this. I've taken the code from the next page, 251. I've taken this code here, and I've put it into um, my follow along chapter 8 HTML page. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically build going down each page. But I've taken this code from here, from page 251, and it's not as pretty, but it definitely gives the example. And right here at 250, 251, the book is basically telling us and showing us a couple of the key points of a form. And quite honestly, by now, since you've taken Web 1, you should know this. But matter of fact, I don't like that this is up here. Put that there. So we have the form tag, the beginning and the ending form tag. The form is named with an ID and a name. The action part of the form is basically when you hit the submit button, do what's ever here. The book gives an example of join.php. I'm just going to have it that since we're not a PHP class, you'll be getting that in the spring semester with fundamentals of internet programming. I'm just going to have it display a page. We're not processing anything at this point in PHP. And right now, it's set to use the get method. And page 250 talks about the difference between the get and the post method, and we'll show that in a second. So you have your form tag. The key thing here is the action. Again, this is a part of the DOM, so it has an ID and a reference as being, the form element, and then all the pieces that live within this form element. When we click the submit button, the joined HTML page will display. It's not going to do anything other than display. And we're going to play with the get and the post method. Now we have a label, we have a text input box, and then we have another text input box for first name. First one is for email, first name, and then we have a submit button, and I added a reset button. So this HTML is giving us basically this form. If I was to go paul@aol.com, Paul Smith, and my clear form button, this reset button right here, this type reset button, basically empties, clears all the data out of the the form. And first name Paul. And if I hit join list, which is right here, join our list, the submit button, because of the action, a simple page you joined, which is just this simple HTML page you joined, is going to display. Typically what would happen is a PHP page would take the elements out of the form and process it to either update a database, send an email, or do whatever it is that you need to have done. Right here, the key things are that were being shown are the form element tag. Input boxes has type being text, and submit button, reset button, action, and the method. Now the method get, what happens is when I hit join list, and I'm going to have to make my form bigger and go all the way to the end, notice that the data, here's joined HTML. That's the page that when we hit submit is being executed. And we're passing email address and first name and those values. The ID of the form element along with the value of the form element is getting passed into that next program. And if it was a PHP program, we'd be able to parse it out and get that information. This is called passing data in the clear, and this is not secure. The one thing is that I could bookmark this and I could get back to this page because the whole string of information is being saved in there. But it's definitely not the secure way that you would be passing data from a form into some sort of process. And again, this is the get method. Now, if we change this method from get to post, refresh my form, and then hit join list, notice now that the attributes that are being passed from the form are no longer displayed in the URL box. This is much more secure. Now the problem is we can't bookmark this with those data elements in there, but that's actually a good thing from a security point of view. So that's what pages 250 and 251 are showing us. I'm going to set this back to get. And the point here is we have a form. Here's the HTML to make the form. Here the example is using join.php. I changed that to just joined. And we've learned about the name that can be referred by the client. That's the name of the input box. We have an ID. The reference here on the ID is for the CSS, and the name is for the value of that variable in the program that's being called. The action is very important. That action is right here, and that action is the page that you want to run when you hit the submit button. And then the method, how do you want to get the data there? Either through a get, which is not as secure, or a post, which is more secure. And how you transfer the data to the PHP program that's getting called, that program has to know how it's coming so that it will get changed. Form, control, field, submit button, reset button, data validation are getting talked about here. Data validation basically is referring to a user is going to type something into this form, and we want to make sure that we control what the user types in and that the data that we expect will come through. When a field has no validation, what can happen is anything can be typed in. And at that point, our data becomes at risk and our process becomes at risk. But if we can control some things up front, that will save us a lot of work. Sometimes data validation is done on the server side. The PHP program that you call may look to see if data is there, and other times data is done on the client side. And that can be done either through CSS and HTML5, or it can be done through jQuery and jQuery validations, which this chapter is teaching about. Okay, pages 252 and 253 now start to introduce a few new elements that are part of HTML5. A little warning here, these elements for forms don't necessarily work for all forms. So in my little sample, I had tried to do it in Firefox and it didn't work well, but in Chrome, a couple of the other ones worked. So if you're using the code that I've provided for this videotape, you definitely want to be in Chrome. Two interesting attributes that are a part are pretty interesting: autofocus and placeholder. Here's the HTML that's on page 253. And here is my modified code. And you'll notice that I've added a few other elements to the 253 code. A couple of the key points here is, first of all, for the phone number, placeholder attribute is there. Notice that the type of this field is called tel for telephone type. There's also now a type called email for email type, and then date type, time type, and range type. The range type was kind of oh, wait a minute. Maybe that's why it was messing up on me. I bet it won't mess up now. There we go. So now, and then range is pretty cool because it goes 1 to 10. The book on page 253 only gives a couple of these attributes. I wanted to add all. I just wanted to play with them and see what they did. So here I am in Chrome. And now notice that my cursor, I'm putting my cursor up here on page 251, and I'm going to refresh the page. And when I refresh the page, notice that the cursor came down here to email address. That is because on email address, the autofocus attribute was set to that field. So what's really nice is you can tell the page where you want that cursor to be and start right away. And autofocus allows you to do that. Also notice under phone number where it says 999999999, that is happening here because of the placeholder. So we have an input form element called email, an import, and then this is just a name field type, a telephone type, a date type, a time type, and a range type. Notice with Chrome that I now have this. If I start typing in just letters like that, if I type numbers like this, I'm going to just put in just a, notice here the order date is actually forcing me to put in valid dates, or I can even pop up a calendar and choose a date. And here with the time, I can put in, it's forcing me to put in a time. And then the slider actually, and I'm not understanding why a display box isn't being shown here. I got to look into that a little more. But the value should be showing up alongside of that. Now, if I hit my join list button, I'm saying it's giving me an error automatically. It's doing data validation, saying, hey, we need an email address, pete@aol.com. Okay, now I've joined it, passed the data validation. Phone number, I'm surprised that it didn't validate on that. 123, 123, 1234. Boom. So we've joined. But the point is that HTML5 now has some elements that allow for right within the right within the object, certain validation. And this is really nice, especially for date fields and time fields. Okay, so I found out why the book does not have an example of range in it. It tells you about the range attribute, but it's not giving us any real life example of using it because it's a little tricky. So I did a quick Google search, and notice here I have resolution DPI, and I have a slider here, and that as I move the slider, this value is changing. Okay, so this is the range in action. So to make this happen, this was a little trickier, and I'm providing the code for you as an example in this field set right here. And so you can see where it's like resolution and on change, this is the value, and I'm guessing the value's input here, ID, style. So what I'm curious about is if I put a B here, will that in fact /B. Okay, again, I'm just playing around. Reset the form. Yeah, so right there, you can see now the value is here. So what I'll do, even to make this a little more obvious, I'll make this an H3. I don't like how that did it. Forget it. I'll just keep it with the B. But you get the point here. The range is not a simple setup, but if you Google, what I had done was I had done the range by itself, and then I Googled input show value, and there's a bunch of examples, and I just grabbed one of those examples for this. The point of page 252 and 253 is that there are some additional attributes that HTML5 allows us. There are some limitations in which browsers it works in, but it does look like it works in most current browsers. And there might be some trickery that you have to do to make it work in little Google searches. But what I like here is the placeholder. Notice it's telling us, 617 543 4552, and it's telling us here. Now we got to do a date. So if I type in, if I here I typed in 57, it gave me a 5, or if I typed in 13, it only gave me 12. I can't type in 55. So it's forcing us to have certain date validations, or here automatic pop-up calendar, which is nice, and then the time. So there's some pretty cool elements within HTML5 that allow for some automatic validations as the user would type data in. Page 254 and 255 now expand some of the HTML5 built-in attributes with required title, pattern, no validate, and autocomplete. Has some examples there. Required and valid, and then here's the code that it used. I grabbed that code and I made a section called 255. And here you can see the pattern matching that's expected. That's based upon regular expression logic. And notice here that the tag required is being used at a couple of different places. Autofocus is here. That's probably going to confuse us with autofocus up on the other page. So we'll see which one wins on that. But the key point is some pattern matchings going on. We have, this is a email type, so we're going to be required to put an email address in here. And so let's see how this page works based upon, this is the code from page 255. And I come up here, okay. Here, I'm in Chrome. I'm going to refresh the page. Notice it went up to 253. That's because the autofocus, that one took precedence. So we come over here. Now we have email address, And if I just type in some junk, and I'm going to put in just some letters here. Now I hit join list, and now it's saying, wait a minute, hey, we need an email address. Okay, so we need an email address. So let's get an email address in there. Pete at AOL.com. And name is a required field, so I'm going to blank that out. And let's hit there. Please fill out this field. And that filled out this field is happening because it's null. So if I put in John Smith, and now I hit the button, now it's saying please match the requested type. So here we needed to have that, 203, 123, 1234. Now it should submit that, oh, please match the requested type. So what's it doing there? 9999. It doesn't like something there. What do I have? That's interesting. I would expect that to work. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Date. So that is unexpected. Hang on. Okay, so I tried several different things for this phone matching thing, and I still couldn't get it to work. So that would require some more digging in. Again, the HTML5 validation stuff is relatively new and doesn't work across all browsers easily, clearly. So so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure that one out. Most likely you would do that type of pattern matching in jQuery, as the next couple of pages talk about. Pages 258 talk about jQuery event methods for forms. And I'm not going to go over the details of this, but basically upon focus, blur, change, select, submit, we're capturing all these events that can happen in a form. And we can then call code, jQuery code, to then run certain validations. And there's a membership form, and I'm going to try to find that. And we'll put that membership form up, and we'll see if we can get that up and working on page 261. So read through pages 256, 257, 58, 59, 60, and give me a second, and I'm going to put together page 261. Okay, so moving on. 2 reasons why you need JavaScript for data validation. The HTML5 features for data validation aren't implemented by all current browsers. We've learned that. And the ones that are implemented aren't always implemented the same way. We've learned that. And HTML5 is limited in the types of validations that it can do. It only has a certain subset. So in other words, the HTML5 validations that are built into CSS or built into HTML5 and the DOM automatically aren't as rock solid as they should be and could be. So then at that point, what we need to do is we need to add code to handle those validations. The next jQuery selectors for form controls. Let's see where I want to get down to where it's actually talking about the code. Okay, here we go. Membership form, right. So the membership form is on page 261. And at a real high level, and then what happened was we've all downloaded from the website. We have a copy of all of the files, the solutions, the exercises, book apps, chapter 8, member form in JavaScript. There's 2 key pieces here. First is this index page. And so if we pop up this index page in a browser, here's the index page. And if we hit submit, we see now a bunch of red stuff happening. Hey, this is required, this is required, this is required. And the password must be at least 6 characters. A 2-character state code, a zip code must be in here. So what's happening here is the form is telling us, I need you to type in the data a certain way. So how is it making that happen? What are the elements? Typically, we've typed in a form, hit submit, just don't worry about it. So let's take a look under the hood. There is this HTML form, the CSS, which makes it look pretty, and then this is the key file, member.js, which is a JavaScript file, which is doing all the work. And then register HTML, that's the page that says, okay, once you've passed all the validations, now display this page. Here's the index page using the style sheet for member, calling jQuery, getting the jQuery out from the web, and it's now using an external file with a lot of JavaScript code in it. And here's all of the fields that are being displayed on the form. And what's interesting, there's not using any HTML5 required or anything like that. And there is a submit button. On the submit button, it is going to do this action register.html. If we look at the register.html file, register.html file, boom. All this is a simple, you've been registered. Nothing really happened. But how is all of this red getting here? That is happening because of the JavaScript code that has been created in the member.js file. Now, since you've all survived chapter 2 of this book, this should be a piece of cake, right? So the key point here is the document ready? Upon that load, all this code is getting put into memory. Objects are being created, dates, years are being created. But right here, this piece of JavaScript code says, when the member form hits the submit button. So this is important because this is telling us the form name. So if we look at index, here is member form, the name here, member form. When the member form, and that's where the DOM posts in, that the parent is the form element, and then within that, there is a submit button, and that's this here, when that submit button is typed. Then when the form element and the submit button is typed, now do this work. And this work includes checking the email address, checking the password. This is validating text field. This text field is required. Validating the password and make sure it's the right length. First name validation. Last name validation, zip code pattern using regular expressions. Did they type in the zip code correctly? Phone number validations, date validations, and is valid, and then did everything pass or not? And if everything did not pass, it's going to keep that at false. So for as long as somebody didn't type in everything correctly, it's not going to let that submit action, or in other words, display the register HTML page. So what's really nice is within the browser itself, the browser displays the form, the member.js file gets called into memory of the browser and is now validation code that's available to, upon the submit event of that form, to go through. And if you take a look, you can basically see the relationship of, here it's saying variable email this is grabbing the value right here. This is the value of the email form. right here, if we take a look here, value of the password element. Let's look down a little more. Value of the first name, and it's even adding a trim method to make sure there's no spaces at the end of it. This is grabbing. So here, this part here is saying the pound sign first name is looking at the form for the name first name right here. And it's saying grab the value from whatever the user typed in, put it into the variable called first name, now do some validation. And in this case, it's saying, is it null? If first name equals null, then I want you to display this text is required. Now, if you want to have some fun, what you can do is just play with some of these pieces here and just change. Here you can see this field is required, this field is required. Change something in that display and then save it and then rerun the page, and you'll start to understand and see the relationships of things. Maybe what would be a nice test is, can you add a new column, a new text box, call it something else, maybe called street or something like that, and then add that onto the form, and then with that, then add some sort of validation to it. So again, the relationship here is an HTML form, the submit button happens, the JavaScript code's already been loaded in from the member.js file. Upon the submit bar action happening, now run this code to make sure all of the form elements are working correctly, are been inputted correctly. If somebody did not type something correctly, then it's not going to display. So let's see, Paul at AOL.com. I'm going to put a 2-character password, and I'm going to put 2 other characters in. This field is required, Paul, last name, and I'm going to hit submit. Notice now I'm getting less problems here. Last name, Kern. Submit. One less problem. Zip code, SSS. Oh, wait a minute. I typed in the zip code wrong. 02035. That likes that. What happens if I type in letters for my password? So that's interesting. The phone number is letting me get away with stuff. It really shouldn't. It needs stronger validation. Okay. And then password must be 6 characters. Oh, I don't want to. That. Let's see. PAUL. And then hit submit. Now that page is now displaying all the data there. So what actually got typed in. So that's pretty nice there. And matter of fact, that let's take a look at the code for that. File, open. If we look at register HTML, what register HTML is actually doing is parsing out the code from that form and displaying it. So if you want to be creative, you could actually take this register HTML form and use this as your action code to then display data on your display data from a form for testing. So if you have a form on your website, maybe modify the register HTML page and let that see how that works in displaying data from your form. Okay, so in recap of what we've talked about so far, in Book Apps, Chapter 8, MemberForm.js is the JavaScript version of form validation, and it has an HTML page that is using validation code that is in the member.js file, which is JavaScript code. And here we see, here's the form, the HTML. Upon hitting the submit button, it's going to want to run the register HTML page. However, because that member.js file is already in memory, it's waiting for the submit event to happen. When that submit event happens in JavaScript, that what will happen is that submit code will then be executed. And it then goes through each and every element on the form to make sure that the rules are correct. And then the JavaScript validation gets pretty detailed here. Here's the pattern matching for the phone, things for being the password matching, and all of this stuff gets pretty detailed. Now remember that JavaScript came before jQuery. Now with that, jQuery is an extension of JavaScript written in JavaScript to make JavaScript easier. Also, there is a plugin for jQuery that even makes jQuery easier, and that is the validation plugin. And so if you go to jQueryvalidation.org, you can get this jQuery code that is another piece of code that gets added to your JavaScript folder, your JS folder, that now this becomes stuff that is available to automatically make your life easier. And here you see within a web page, and now what we're doing is we are getting up to page 264. Let's see, so we've done 266, 263. Now we're at page 264. And top of page 265, we see that first you got to call in jQuery. Then you have to call in the validate plugin, which is additional jQuery code. That's what's here in yellow. And then you call the email list, which is doing some more additional JavaScript coding. Here we have our email form, and it has an email address and a first name and things like that. Within jQuery, now what we have is we're saying I want to validate the email form, and I want to use these objects and these rules. And then so the rule for email address 2 equal to email address 1 quantity, and so all the details of these rules get mapped out. And so now if we go Book Apps, Chapter 8, Member Form Validation, and you see that additional methods are here, a validate is here, the member.js is here, but we're going to call this guy. This page now gets called, and if we hit submit, we have a lot of stuff going on in red. Now, if we look at the code behind the scenes, the index page, calling jQuery, calling the validate, calling an additional methods, JavaScript, and the member.js file. Upon the submit button, this register HTML is going to happen. But that member.js is basically going to call upon this validate on the form when that submit button gets hit. These rules are going to get run instead. Now, what's really nice about these rules is that you're calling them by jQuery type, and you're getting automatic phone, password, and other sorts of things built into the validate form, built into the validate API or plugin, that just you don't have to do all the details of the length and things like that. On page 273, you can start to you'll see the details for the jQuery validation application package, where you can see how the password's getting set, verifying the password, the first name is being required, last name's being required. And so what's happening is you're using this syntax as it relates to each individual field to say how you want that behavior, that validation behavior to happen. I want the zip code. I want it to be required, and I want the range to be from 5 to 10 characters. I want the phone number to be required, and I want the phone number type US to be true. I want to have a date, and I want it to be a date field required. Card number required, and is a credit card type true. So these become basically parameters that are getting set in your member.js file that are calling the validate plugin. So clearly you have to know the rules of each plugin type or validation type so you set them up right. So for email, you could say required is false if you don't care. Or email, if you say here, if you say false, then you're saying, okay, but you really don't have to follow the rules of the email validation code that's in that validation API. So the book goes into detail on how to take advantage of each of these pieces and realize that your member.js file is the file that your code is going to call when you hit the submit button to say, I want to do this stuff. I want to do these validations. These validations are going to happen because the validation plugin, which is also being called by which is calling and using jQuery. So it's a marriage between jQuery, the validate, some additional methods added, and this is the file here. The member.js file is the file that you are changing and adding that the relationship, like if you're going to add new elements to a form, you would need to update your member.js file to make it work correctly. And using and understanding how the jQuery validate works and what functionality is underneath there will make your life. You're just basically typing a lot less code. And I think if I remember correctly, right here, clearly for more information, jQueryvalidation.org. I'm sure there's tons of documentation on every possibility of how to use this validation API to do your validations on your form. And as you're doing form validations, it's basically going to allow you to not have bad data go in. And when we get into the PHP class, if you're able to implement this jQuery validation API into your forms, your data going into your MySQL database will be a lot cleaner. Um, Hopefully this has been helpful. There's examples on exercise 8.1 and 8.2. I think there's probably a short, and has we've a short also to do. And then don't forget I've given you the solutions to the extras. Look at those extras. I've talked to a couple of other students, and they've said just by looking at the extras code and playing with the extras examples, it really does help to see how these various pieces are working together. So I hope this helps. Have a great day.